Oh, this is okay. Good afternoon. This is Dr. Anasuya from Malaysia, and I have the great honor of being here with Dr. Respect from America, and we are interviewing him on for the Mental Health and Happiness Summit. So, please introduce yourself, Marcus.
Yes, hi, I am Marcus, Dr. Respect Gentry. I'm here in Chicago, Illinois. I'm very excited to be a part of this summit, a very powerful summit, and I'm excited to be a part of that. So
Okay.
that's it.
So Marcus, what you have the title of Doctor Respect. What does that mean? What do you do? Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your work?
I sure can. I sure can. Dr. Respect, that's actually a title that was given to me by a young man that worked in the area where I live. And I always have been speaking about the principles and the concept of respect as a philosophy, as an idea. So every time he would see me, I was talking about it on some level. And he said,
Okay.
"You are really the doctor of respect." And and it caught on, and I just started carrying it more and more, and it became the theme. It was already the theme of everywhere I would go when I would do my presentations and work with groups with young people and adults as well. So it just caught on, and that became a part of it. So I have taken the word respect and expanded it through years of research into principles that can work.
Okay, so you've taken the word respect and put it into many areas of principles that where it works in life. And respect
Yes,
is one of those things that is critical to who we are and critical to happiness. So just
very, yes.
yeah, just on the topic that we are sharing today, when we say happiness, what does the word happiness mean to you?
Happiness to me means being able to find balance in your life. If you can
Mm-hmm.
have balance and contentment with the decisions that you've made, and as I will sometimes say, decisions that allow you to be able to sleep peacefully at night.
Ah, yes.
Have peace and balance in your life is what happiness is. They say that there is no difference between a person who has everything in life that they can imagine and a person who feels that they don't need anything. Contentment is the same. So you look at people who are very wealthy, that have a lot of material possessions, and you look at people in smaller countries who may have very little, just a roof over their head, but the happiness and contentment can be equally the same for both of them. So they have balance and contentment and peace in their life.
Yeah, that's very important, of course. And with this balance, happiness, and peace, if you're talking about mental health, what is
Yes.
that? How would you define mental health?
Mental health, I think, again, still has to do with being able to be contented and balanced in different areas of your life, physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, being able to have what I would say is basic contentment,
Yeah.
and being able to manage successfully through for what I call universal dynamics of life. I think there's four things that everybody in life has to go through, and that's education, understanding that, communication, relationships, conflict, and confrontation. Those are areas that everybody's going to go through. So if you can manage through those things and maintain some peace and
Yeah.
balance, then you can stay mentally healthy and be able to develop some tools to be resilient, when things happen.
I mean, it's interesting that, even, when we're even talking about mental health and happiness, we bring up this idea of conflict and sadness and,
Yeah.
the other side of the picture. So how do you think that if there's any relationship at all, what would the relationship of sadness and this conflict have with, creating a balance of mental health and happiness that you mentioned earlier?
I think sadness is something that people are going to experience. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
something that happens when you experience possibly a loss or something like that. So you're going to experience the sadness. The balance comes in, or the health comes in how you manage that emotion when it comes up. So it's going to come up at different points in our lives, either with relationships or financial reversals or health issues or things like that. But the real challenge becomes how we manage that emotion, what we do with it, whether we suppress it, whether we turn it into some form of aggression, whether we become depressed, or whether we find ways to start managing what that emotion is.
Okay,
So
and since
I
you've
think
mentioned
it's
it,
going to come. Yes.
my next obvious question is going to be, how does one manage it? How does one manage to get that balance and those happiness? What does Dr. Respect do to get that?
One of the things that's important, I believe, to do to be able to get that is to secure what I call an oxygen mask. Secure a system of support for yourself, because something is going to happen to all of us. As a good friend of mine that used to live in the South, Big Bob, used to say, suddenly. We're going to have something suddenly that's going to happen that's going to be outside of our set of expectations and may cause us to have that feeling of sadness, or
Hmm.
eventually something is going to happen through our transitions in life. But if we can secure what I call the oxygen mask, so that means a support system for us physically when we're going through something, a support system when we're emotionally going through something, spiritually, if we have a moral decision, we're trying to decide if something is right or wrong, how we're going to handle that. Intellectually, we need to process something with someone. Financially, all those areas come. So if we can secure those resources for ourselves
Yeah.
when the unexpected does happen, then we have something that we can go to. We have someone that we can possibly go to that can help us, and we have something that we can do to help us manage that, because we may not always have a person available, or the person that we've identified may not be available at the time that we need them.
Yep.
So there needs to be, for us, not only a who we can go to, but a what we can do to help us manage that.
And if you could give a few examples of what would be different resources that people have. I mean, specific resources, because you did mention a number of areas. You mentioned finance. You mentioned this. You mentioned a number of areas. But I'm just asking if you could give an example, a specific example or a story, which would help maybe a viewer who's just coming in understand how they can develop balance in their life.
Okay, well, let's just say something happens emotional,
Mm.
and that could be something with the relationship that you may have with your parents, or something with your children, or something of that sort. So a specific example was when my mother
All right.
became sick. I lost my mother 2 years ago
Mm.
this week. 2 years
Okay.
ago this week,
My
actually.
condolences.
Yes, thank you. And I definitely needed some emotional support during that time,
Yeah.
and it was a difficult time, and there were some people that just were not available that I could not connect with. So what was my oxygen mask? What could I do? And for me, finding balance was being able to go in parts of nature. So being around the water became
Mm.
very calming and settling for me, and being on a walk through a wooded trail was very relaxing for me to be able to do that, to be able to, in some cases, write down some of what my thoughts were, what I was going through. And because of being in the arts as well, trying to put some of it in parts of a poem, a part of a song, or
Yes.
something like that. So something to get it out so that it could help me to be able to manage that. And that's an example of what I'm talking about. Just finding whatever works for you. For some people, it may be going to work out. It may
Yes.
be riding a bicycle. It may be fishing. It may be reading a book or something like that. It may be out socializing with friends. Some people, when they're going through something, they feel better when they're around others. Some people feel better if they isolate themselves. Um, but it's about finding the balance between either one of those things, because you can be around people so much that you don't take the time to be introspective enough
That's
to
important. Yes.
process what's going on. And you can also be alone so much that you don't engage with other people to help you get a better perspective of what you're dealing with. So again, it comes back to being able to find that balance. So
Okay.
so that's what I mean. So now those are things that we can do, but it's ideal X also if there are people that you can talk to.
Yes.
Maybe there is a certain person who you know that um, is very intellectually stimulating for you, and you can talk to this person about career planning kinds of things, or things concerning your job, and
Mm-hmm.
and things of that. So, well, that's a resource, right? It gives you somebody to help you manage things when you're
Yes.
trying to figure it out. Um, when I was talking about spiritual oxygen mask, you may have a moral issue. So for some people, it may be reading a Bible. For some people, it may be a Quran. Maybe it's a Book of Mormon. For some people, it may be something they see on television. Maybe they have a priest, a nun, a monk. I don't know. Just somebody, maybe a good friend next door,
Yes. Yes.
or an older person, or a barber, or a beautician, or someone. It could be it's somebody who shines shoes. It could be anybody
Could be anybody. Yeah.
you have connected with, but they for you have a voice of reason when it comes to finding resolve to sensitive matters. But it's good to know those persons or those things in advance, so that at the time of crisis, when something happens, you don't panic.
Yes, that's important. Okay, so how does your work in general relate to mental health and happiness?
Well, the work that I do, I specialize in. I would be considered like a transition strategist. So I help people to manage transitions. Um, but I'm also into the arts. We were talking about this before,
Yes, we will.
but before we went live, and so I do theater and music as well. So there's a larger umbrella that covers what I do that I would call creative empowerment. So
Yes.
a lot of times when I'm doing theater or when I'm doing music, I will add some educational components in there that might help people make it through difficult things. Or when I'm doing other presentations or workshops, I may have some music in the background or some form of theatric, just as a part of the creative process to help make the point. So in helping people manage transition and using creative empowerment, I teach what's called universal principles,
Okay.
and help individuals and businesses engage in a process where they can adjust the mindset to start practicing principles that can help them manage pretty much whatever it is that they're trying to do. So I've come up with 10 dominant principles that help people to do that. So I've done that with school systems, I've done
Mhm.
that with businesses, and I've done that in my work with the military.
Okay. Could you share a couple of these principles? I mean, not all 10 because that'll be later on, but I doubt we've got time. But, just a couple of the principles so that we get an idea of what you're talking about.
Of course, of course. Well, I'll begin with the top two or three. The very first principle is the principle of respect itself. So
No surprise there, Dr. Respect.
I bet you're not surprised.
No.
So the principle talks about learning to respect yourself,
All right.
respect for others, and respect for the environment. So
Mm.
as we expand this a little bit more, it's difficult at best to be able to respect yourself if you don't know who you are. So the first part of the principle, as I work with either an individual or an organization, is to help them get an understanding of who they are, what they're about. The more they understand and give them permission to be who they are. A lot of people are not comfortable with who they are. They're not aware that they're not comfortable. So they start trying to look, act like, dress like, behave like other people that they think is more acceptable. So it ultimately is saying that they really don't respect themselves because they haven't had permission, or somewhere down the line they were convinced that it's not okay to be who they are. So first one's respecting yourself because of first knowing yourself, then respecting other people and realizing that we are interconnected, and that it took two people to make you and four people to make the two people that made you, and so on and so on. So ultimately we're all connected, and once we realize that there is a connection between all of us, even though we may not look the same or we may be in different time zones,
Yes,
then we'll
definitely.
which we definitely are now,
Yes.
we will have different kinds of and more healthy relationships once we understand the interconnectedness we have with each other. Same
Okay.
thing is true with the environment. When we understand the value of taking care of our environment, whatever that environment is, if it's the environment, our outside environment of the trees, the grass, things around, or the internal environment of our home. So in nature, we learn the greatest lessons of life. There's a interrelationship. The trees know how to extract from the environment the things that it needs to help it grow to be what it is. So when we understand the principles that operate in nature and externally and internally, and respect and appreciate that, then it helps us become more rounded. Now that's just talking about one principle, the principle of respect.
Right. That's pretty deep. I'm just going to ask because you said you worked with the military, but how do you get the military? I mean, okay, because I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of war, and when you
Okay.
talk about environment and respect, when
Yes.
you are dealing with the military, were you talking about actual physical environment, or was it just the internal environment of the military? Just
Well, I
help
work
me.
with the military. I work with several different phases, from pre-deployment,
Mm-hmm.
deployment, and post-deployment,
Oh,
usually
amazing.
30, 60, and 90-day post-deployment. And it will be a variety of areas. We may talk about how to manage that transition. How do
Right.
you maintain healthy communication between your family members, your spouse, if that's the case, or your parents and your children? How do you stay connected when you're separated? Talking to
Yeah.
them about that. Respecting the role that you have individually and all that goes along with that individual role that you have. Respecting the other person and what they're about to do as it being different from what it is that you're doing. Um, and that changes from pre-deployment to during deployment because there's a whole different dynamic. Then
Yeah.
there's the returning um, um, component. How do
Right.
you manage that? How do you deal with anger? How do you
Yes.
find and maintain your balance when you're
Yes.
dealing with? How do you deal with the different cycles or the emotions that go along with the different phases of deployment? So we talk about that, and as we talk about that, I will tie in some form of one of the universal principles in there. But there is no
Yeah.
time where respect is excluded.
Of
You don't
course.
exclude that in the process. You just refine it according to what particular phase of it we're talking about.
That must be fascinating work that you do with the military, especially coming back home. I mean, as much as you don't like war, human beings, the soldiers are human beings. And coming
Yes,
as I don't like war, sorry, not you, not I don't like war. I mean,
yes.
I have got a huge amount of respect for the people who are going to war, and that that amount of work that you do must be fascinating.
It is fascinating, and what I have learned that what I know is a fraction of what I learned from spending time with those who are about to deploy or coming back from deployment. The stories that they tell, the
Hmm.
things that they keep inside, and you're right that that returning component is very serious because things have shifted.
Yes,
Nothing
they have.
stays exactly the same, and trying to find what they refer to now as the new normal. Again, that's
Hmm.
managing relationships or managing that transition, because in that part I talk about the different types of connections that we have as we go through life. Always, you're either going to be looking to connect with someone,
Yes.
reconnect, maintain a connection, or disconnect. And
Right.
each one of them requires a different type of communication. And one of the biggest problems is that people, especially in returning from the deployment,
Yeah.
they try to reconnect based on old
Old
information.
information. Hmm. Yes.
And each person is at a different place. And so it takes time to improve communication, especially the listening part, so that you can find out where the person is. And you won't do that if you don't have respect for someone else.
That's true. That's very true. I mean, this is hard work. This is and it requires a lot of different skills and different abilities, different knowledge base. So, how did
Yes.
you get into this field? I mean, how did you start to become who you are today? I mean, say if we have a viewer out there who's young and who's just starting out, maybe if you share a bit of your story, maybe they can become Dr. Respect number 2 in the future.
Little
So,
Dr. Respect.
yeah.
Well, um, if I listen to what my parents have told me, I have always been some version of this, even from a small child. And when I think about that question, two things come to mind. Curiosity
Yeah.
is one of the things that caused me to continue to be intrigued by human behavior. Now, I haven't been curious about how to fix a car or necessarily how to, fix a toaster or some things like that.
Whatever.
But I have but I have been curious about human behavior and why people operate a certain way and what causes them to do certain things. So I couple my curiosity with my passion for wanting people to be well and
Okay.
wanting things to go well. And I think that combined started leading me towards things. I had, from what my parents tell me, I used to have groups of young kids gathered around me, even as a kid. We would be telling stories, or I'll be trying to explain something or understand something from them. Even as a child, they said that I was very interested in details of little
Ah.
things, whether it was the detail of a package that I had or the detail of a story, and that continues to be true today. So I find that even more now, people skirt over some of the more um, intrinsic kinds of things of why things are a certain way. And if you look a little bit deeper, you'll go to what I call the fifth level of inquiry. So
Yeah.
not just asking, what is it that you would like to do, or what is it that's wrong, going down 5 levels deep and saying, well, why do you feel that's wrong? And how is that impacting your family? Or how is that impacting your
Mm-hmm.
life? Or how long is that go? So just by continuing to go deep. So I've always been curious and had a passion for people. And I believe,
Mm-hmm.
as is often said, that there are no coincidences,
No.
only the illusion of a coincidence because of details not yet revealed.
Okay.
So, many years ago, I was applying for a job at a state hospital in the clerical department,
All right.
and that was what I was interested in. And what I was told after a couple of days that there was no opening in that position any longer. But on the children and adolescent unit that was working with young people, there was an opening that they believed I would be perfect for. And
Ooh.
that was my formal introduction into that arena. And the experiences that I learned then has carried with me down to this day. And I continue to build and research and investigate as much as I can to try to find solutions that are universal.
Yeah.
What I've not liked is seeing programs in the past that were just for one particular group
Yep.
or one person, but wouldn't work in a variety of different settings. So I look for solutions that are universal and that can create mental health and happiness no matter who you are, to make the best or get the best of any conceivable situation.
Yeah. And there are a lot of situations today in our lives which are totally out of our control. I
Yes.
mean, from natural disasters or even Malaysia, disappearing planes, to
Yes.
different variant to various things going wrong, people getting sick, hurricanes, man-made disasters, acts of terror, whatever. So there's a lot of things in our world that are out of our control. How would people go about maintaining a positive, or a good or a balanced mental health and happiness state in face of these kinds of challenges?
Um, I there's many ways that I can answer that. One of the ways is going back to what I mentioned before.
Mm.
The unexpected is going to happen to all of us
Yes.
at some point. Maya Angelou, um, who wrote many books and spoke of many subjects, one of her books was called Wouldn't Take Nothing for This Journey. And in the book, she said, we don't know anything. We don't know where buses will fail, cars will stall, or whether we'll get to our destinations whole and intact, or when we get there, it will be as we left it. She says, the only thing that we know for certain is that we are created creative, and we can create new scenarios as frequently as we need to. So if we stay conscious that anything could possibly happen and put that um, oxygen mask or that relief system in place ahead of time, then it kind of helps us be prepared when the unexpected does happen, just a little bit more prepared. Um, uh, Most often in a crisis, people go back to doing what they're most familiar with as opposed to trying something new
Yeah.
at the point of crisis. So the wisest thing, just like when you get on a plane or when you get in a car, they'll ask you to put your seatbelt on and know where the oxygen mask, know where the exit ramps are, give you all these precautions, get insurance. You can't get all out of a car lot, at least here in America, unless you have car insurance ahead of time, just in
Okay.
case. So it's the same thing. We should be prepared or have something in place in case of the unexpected. Now, we can't prepare for every eventuality,
Right.
but we can do the best that we can to remain flexible, so that we can adapt as we need to,
Right.
so
And
that we keep our balance.
so yeah, and just because you're balanced or you've achieved a state of balance, it doesn't mean, you're going to be balanced. Do you think, does that mean you're balanced the whole time, your whole life, or do you go off balance and come back? How do you think that works?
I think it's just like a person walking on a tightrope. If you've seen them, yeah, it is. It's an they call it a balancing act. So you're constantly moving from one place to the other. So in balancing your life, one time you might need to add more intellectual kinds of things into your life to balance it, or you
Okay.
may need to increase your social activity, or you may need to do some things to improve your financial standing. There might be different things that you have to do at different points. No, it will not always be the same. It's constantly changing, as long as we remain flexible to be able
Okay.
to do that and stay conscious that things are changing. So that's a great point. Sometimes when we get on a path, we assume that this is going to be it. Once we're there, that things are just going to keep going. But the reality is things might change, and we have to be able to adjust as we need to. So again, it's good to have some things that we know can restore our balance. So, yeah, restore our
Yeah,
balance.
Marcus, that you said something quite fascinating, that we have to be conscious of things going off balance. Now, many of us are just not conscious. You're absolutely right just now when you said they've reached a place and things are going and things seem to be going great.
Right.
So, what would you say? I mean, if you have any or if any ideas, what would be, if somebody who is aware and is conscious of trying to maintain a balanced life, how would you go about monitoring or self-monitoring to ensure that you have mental health and happiness on a long-term basis, and say, okay, look, these are actual signs that something is wrong, you know?
One of the things that I would say is first is to be still. Be still and unplug.
That's
And
I'm very rarely still, but okay.
yes. Be still and do some reflection. One of the 10 dominant principles is reflection. So
Okay.
take a moment and be still and just reflect on, are you heading in the direction that you want to go?
Okay.
Are you clear about what success looks like? So it's about taking the time to unplug from other stuff and ask those kinds of questions. Are you heading in the direction that you want to go? Do you have clarity about the purpose that you're on this course?
Mm-hmm.
Many times people are on a course, and to the untrained eye, it looks like they're successful
Yes.
because they've got the degree, they've got the new job, the house, the marriage, the divorce, the baby, the whatever, the car, and at the end of it, they feel something is missing. Well,
Right.
the reality is that they were following somebody else's dream instead of their own. They were doing what other people thought it was good for them to do, and it wasn't their own course of happiness. So internally, they just were not satisfied. So be still long enough to make sure where you're going, that your purpose is clear, that you have a plan or a vehicle that's going to help you get there. And the one piece that I would add that's critically important, I believe, is to adapt a philosophy to live by, a
Okay.
set of principles
Hmm.
that you will live by. There's a lady by the name of Anne Rand, and she wrote a book called Atlas Shrugged. And in the book, she made the statement that you can determine the future of a society or an individual by their philosophy. If you can determine their philosophy, you'll be able to pretty much predict their future. So, in trying to assess how you're doing as far as your balance is concerned, it's about being still and looking at some of those areas. But as you indicated earlier, it is not the easiest thing to do.
No, it's not.
There was a study that was recently done. You may have come across it. It was recently done in Virginia, and they
Okay.
gave people an opportunity to be in a room by themselves and do absolutely nothing but reflect or ponder. They couldn't look at their watch or phone or anything.
They couldn't
They
look
had
at
to
the iPhones and iPads. Oh my God, they would have gone nuts.
they couldn't look at it, but what they could do was shock themselves with electric shock. So they could either shock themselves or sit still. The majority of them, Anasu, shocked themselves with electric shock as opposed to sitting still. So yes, I realize that it's very difficult for people to do that. Now they did that in a laboratory, and they also tried it in people's homes to see if it would make a difference. It made no difference. And they were
So,
talking about a period of maybe 15 minutes.
so people would rather hurt themselves.
Shock themselves.
Yeah,
Yes,
well, which is basically hurting yourself. I don't think shock was like, a pleasant shock.
that's right. It wasn't
It's,
pleasant.
it's electric, yeah. So,
Yes,
so unless we're all messages, which I doubt that, it's like, we'd rather experience pain than look inward. We've
yes.
kind of lost that ability to look inward and look at ourselves and say, okay, my happiness maybe is inward, and I'd rather have external pain than inward peace.
And so people look for so many things to give them that external happiness.
Mm-hmm.
A dear friend of mine who is a movie producer out in California, I was visiting him a few years ago, and he took me up to this mountain near where he lives, and it was a beautiful place. I often tell this story. It was beautiful air. You could look over the mountains, see the city. It was quiet. It
Yes.
was peaceful. And I
Yes.
said, "Oh my, this is so nice." I said, "Do you bring many people up here?" And he said, "No, I don't." I said, "Well, why not?" He said, "For most people, it's too noisy." I said, "What do you mean too noisy?" He said, "When it gets quiet like this, you start hearing your inner voice. And for some people,
Ah,
that's too much. And
right,
so
right.
they'd rather be distracted with external things than sitting and listening to that inner voice that says, maybe I need to do something different with my health. Maybe I need to do something different with my my relationship. Maybe I need to do something different with my finances. But instead, I'm going to busy myself with outside things and get on what's called the hedonic treadmill, where they're constantly buying this new item and the new phone, and our desires rise in tandem with our acquisitions. So as soon as we get something else, we are desirous of something else, so there's no happiness. That's why they say statistically that even though now, as a society of people, we have much more in terms of material possessions than we had 50 years ago,
Yeah.
but we're not happier
No, we're
because of
not.
possessions. So that didn't create greater happiness because we have jobs that are paying more, or have more cars or bigger homes and things of that sort.
Yeah, and I mean, although we have this trend of people not focusing internally on happiness,
Hmm.
because we have got, a shrinking world. I'm here in Malaysia, you're in
Yes,
America, and we are having this communication, and
yes,
there's actually a lot more noise in the world. So the noise is increasing,
yes,
and that ability to go and accept stillness and balance, which is actually needed for mental health and happiness,
yes,
seems to have decreased.
yes.
Or the ability is it a skill? Is it ability? Do you
It is
think
definitely it is definitely a skill, and it's a growing skill. There were times, and I lived for a time in the south of
Mhm,
here in Georgia, and it was common to see people strolling and going for a casual walk. There
mhm,
weren't as many distractions of things, or seeing people just sitting out and relaxing and maybe talking to each other, just enjoying the outside. Now it takes much more work to be able to get to that still place. Usually when you see people walking, they're not walking for relaxation, they're walking specifically for exercise or to get somewhere. They're power walking, or something like that.
right,
But
and they're listening to the iPhone and the iPad and whatever
at the
eyes they
same
have.
time, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, it's a skill that we definitely need, and it won't be there if we don't practice this. So I typically will ask my audiences, when is the last time that you took at least 5 minutes just for yourself to do absolutely nothing but relax and breathe?
right,
And the majority have not taken time for
right.
themselves to do that. But that's a part of what's valuable in terms of being able to find and maintain mental health, and be able to find out what real happiness is.
Yeah. I mean, you are also slightly off, but actually related. You are also an entertainer and a performer, and
Yes.
you basically, as you told me earlier, were Oberon in
Yes, Oberon and Midsummer Night's Dream.
in A
Yes, yes,
Midsummer's Night Dream, which is pretty
yes,
amazing because it was when I was a kid. It was one of my favorite Shakespeare plays. So I
yes.
just want to ask you, what is the impact of drama? I mean, because this is something that we're losing in today's world as well. Everybody wants to have the TV and no live shows. As a performer, as somebody who does live shows, and then you have a greater audience than just the training that you're doing in
Yeah.
increasing mental health and happiness. This live shows is having this interaction. How do you think that impacts on mental health and happiness of having people participate or having people in the audience or both?
I think both. I think both is great. First of all, the camaraderie that comes from being with a cast of people that you work together to tell a
Mm-hmm.
story.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been fascinated by stories, so um, that's one thing. So I always learn, because I believe when you become a student of life, you can learn from everybody and every situation that you're in. So being in those theatrical places can allow you to um, build a bond with people that you may would have not normally spent that time with, and maybe hear stories that you wouldn't have normally heard, or learn new skills to
Yeah.
expand your ability to find passion in new areas. So in theater, you may find someone else who's dancing, or someone else who's singing, or they're involved in a different piece. And so passion being one of the 10 dominant principles anyway, the more passion that you have in life, the more happy
Yeah.
you find yourself. People are very happy when they're doing things that they're passionate about. And
Yeah.
the only way to find your passion is to expose yourself to different things, experiment with them, and then evaluate that. That's for those on the stage.
Okay. Wait. Just difference between passion and happiness.
Passion is the driving force that impels you towards the things that you're interested in,
Mm-hmm.
that height of excitement. I
Yes.
think of happiness as more of a contentment
Okay.
that
So
you have, a feel good contentment. A passion is the thing that wakes you up in the middle of the night with an idea to write a poem, or to write a song, or to write a presentation that may help somebody. That's the passion that somebody has. The passion when somebody is talking about one of the things they enjoy doing, maybe fishing or sewing or building something. That's a
yeah.
passion. After the story has been written, or the song has been created, or the house has been built, then they're happy after after it's been completed. It's a feeling of contentment that comes from that. And
Okay.
and for those who go to the theater,
Yeah.
happiness ties into that, because for just a moment, and this is what I ask when I'm doing a musical performance, I ask them to leave whatever they did at the door, and not worry about what they're going to do when they leave, but allow that experience to take them to a totally different place for
Mm-hmm.
that next hour and a half or 2 hour time. And that's what going to theater is able to do in terms of adding to a person's mental health and happiness. It's able to bring joy to people who maybe would have not ordinarily had that.
Yeah.
Uh, and I tell you an experience that I had that speaks to that. I was doing a performance in a theater, one of my singing performances, and at a certain point, I was inviting people to the stage to dance.
All right.
Um, and so they were on stage and they were dancing, and as they were leaving, I was asking them their name and different things like that. So there was one guy who came up later and he danced the whole song, and he was one of the last ones leaving. And I asked him his name, and he volunteered that said he was 101 years old.
What?
101 years old, danced an entire song on stage, works a couple of times a week part time. He's my oldest fan. Yes,
101 years old.
101 years old. But the joy that came from that. I did a lot of performances for seniors, and to see seniors who would ordinarily be sitting and not doing much of anything, but hear a certain song and come alive almost, to bring a certain kind of happiness. Um,
And I suppose
there,
that's the
there's
difference. Yeah, that's
power.
the difference between a movie theater and a live theater. Because in the
Yes,
live theater, you can participate in a
yes,
higher level. You can be part of the dance, even though it's at the
yes,
end, and that when the curtain closes and your curtain calls, and that's when they go up on stage. It's still you meet people, you connect with people, and you're not just
yeah.
connecting with the screen.
That's right. That's exactly
Hmm.
right. And
Yeah.
there's power in that connection. There's power in music. It
Okay.
can bring a certain kind of not only I'll say not only a mental health. It ties to mental health, not only a happiness, but it can also bring a healing.
Okay.
Um,
So you're saying that power is power part of your 10 dominant characteristics?
Power is not one of the 10 dominant principles, but power is
Okay. Sorry.
another that I talk about, how to unleash your personal power. That's a
Right.
whole different set of things that I teach as well.
Yeah.
Unleashing personal power.
And when you're saying that there's power in the music to heal,
Yes.
there's power. What do you mean by that?
You just say explain that.
So yeah,
You
yeah.
said
What did you? Sorry,
explain.
yeah. What did you
Okay.
mean by the power
The
to
the,
heal?
the for the power to heal.
Uh,
I'll give you a couple of very definite examples. Um,
right.
One example was um, with a lady who had Alzheimer's and
Mm-hmm.
had trouble being able to remember very much of anything. And she was invited to a wedding. And
Okay.
this story was shared with me at an event that I was at. She was invited to a wedding. The people had who were organizing it had put her name down to sing a song. Um, they didn't know that her illness had progressed to the state that it was when they put her name on the program.
Okay.
The music started playing. She went up and sang the song word for word
Ooh.
and never missed a word or never missed a note.
Yeah.
There's healing power in that. I watched my mother, who worked to manage with Alzheimer's and that, and have moments when she was sitting and not moving or saying anything, and a particular song would come
Okay.
on. The song was called "Lean on Me" by Bill Withers,
Yeah.
and she would start smiling and rocking and moving to the beat of the
Right.
music the entire time. Her whole demeanor would change just by hearing the music. So that there's a healing power that comes with being able to, because it triggers certain things. I was told that you may lose certain parts of your cognitive reasoning ability, but emotions are still intact in many cases, and that music can trigger particular emotions and bring up a happiness
Yeah.
or a piece of mental betterment or wellness.
Okay, Marcus, honestly, throughout this whole interview, you've been giving a lot of tips on how to cultivate habits that will keep people mentally healthy and keep a
Yes.
positive happiness. But if I'm going to ask you to encapsulate it a little bit, because it was done throughout the whole thing, what would be your major tips, um, practical stuff to keep people mentally healthy, to keep a positive mental health and happiness?
Um, I would say to develop a philosophy in life
Mm-hmm.
that you are comfortable with, that will help you manage through a variety of different situations. You've heard me talk about 10 dominant principles, so I have principles that I encourage people to look at and consider as a possibility. Um, to find that, to kind of put it in a nutshell, of what people I would like people to walk away with, is this: to know that between something happening and your reaction to it, there is a gap.
Yeah.
And the more you learn about who you are and your potential, the wider that gap becomes and increases the possibilities of things that you can do
Okay.
to
Uh,
find your happiness and your contentment.
So here's an interesting question. We've talked about some of your 10 dominant principles, and they are very interesting principles so far. Where would somebody be able to get their hands more information, or get a bit of ideas of how they can actually develop these principles and these philosophies for themselves? Where can they get your stuff there?
Okay, well, they can go to my website as a beginning, which is marcusgentry.com.
All right.
Obviously, www.marcusgentry.com
MHH.com.
goes to my portal site, and when you go there, you can go to Marcus Gentry and Associates, and that's where it has a list of things that I'm involved in, some of the things that I'm doing, and an easier or even more direct way as well. I can be emailed, and you can reach out for me directly. And the email is very simple. It's respect@marcusgentry.com.
All right. And do you have a book out? Do you have a book that you can get on Amazon or something like that?
I have I've written a chapter in a book. I'm in the process of writing a book called The Way of Respect.
Okay.
Hopefully it'll be published soon. But there's a book that's out now called Fixing Education. That's going to be listed on my site soon. And I have a chapter in there. There's about 9 educators that co-authored this book. There's a chapter in there that deals specifically with understanding the principles of respect.
And dealing with young people?
Dealing with young people, it's because they're universal principles.
Right.
That particular one, Fixing Education, does talk about working with young people in the school system, but the principles work also in businesses as well.
Yeah, well, let's face it. Nowadays, young people, in respect, they may need it as much as big business, or maybe more. You know,
Yes.
and I don't blame
Yeah.
them. It's probably because we don't respect them that it's a two-way thing.
It,
Okay, so people can connect to you via your portal. People can email you, and to look
yes.
out for a book that's going to be coming up soon under
Yes.
Marcus Gentry. Okay,
Yes.
so we are down to, I think, the last 10 minutes of our interview, and I'm hoping that some of the viewers have questions which they can post and ask. what would you like? What would you like people to take away? I mean, if somebody is, if from your, from not just from this interview, but from your work. Okay, because if you said you have a philosophy, so what would your, I mean, let me ask this before I ask the last question. What is your personal philosophy?
My personal philosophy is, as you can imagine, the philosophy of respect. And
I
so
got
let
that
me,
one, but yeah.
right. So let me quickly tell you what those principles include, if it's okay.
Yes, please.
Principles are respect, discipline, responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
reflection, enlightenment, stabilization or building resiliency, passion, clarity, and teaching others what you know. Each one of those combine to create the philosophy that I live by.
Okay.
And the more I embrace and study those principles, the stronger it becomes in me, the better I'm able to share and teach it with other people. So if there was a takeaway, if there was one thing that I wanted people to really know,
All right.
is that it's okay to be you. Many people don't know that it's
Yeah,
all right to be themselves, so they
that's true.
try to become like so many other people, and that's not just young folks. That's
Mm-hmm.
young, old, around the world. It's okay to be you.
Okay.
Next, it's okay to be. So it's all right just to be still. So sometimes we feel that we have to always be doing something, going somewhere, making something happen. It's okay to unplug, disconnect, and just be.
All
And the
right.
last one, it's okay. It's just okay. So it's all right. Just sometimes we add importance to unimportant things, because at the end of the day, another day is going to start.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to learn how to keep things in perspective and realize it's okay. So whatever's happening, if something is not going right in your life in any phase, it's only going to last a season. The heaviest rain, the worst downpour, the worst storm only lasts for a short period of time, only lasts for a season. So no matter how bad it may seem, it's only going to last for a season. It's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay. And it's okay to be human and realize that we have limitations. There are
Mm-hmm.
great things that we do, and sometimes because people have done so many great things, so many positive things, that they forget that they have limitations, and they try to live up to being the superman, the superwoman, the super mom, the super dad, and forget that they're human.
And they have a super breakdown.
Yeah. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. We see and hear it all the time, don't we?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's a question from somebody. How do you convey respect to young people to make them feel that I, as an adult, do respect them?
Well, I would say, so the question is, how do they let a young person know that they do respect them?
Yeah, especially if it's like a short, a short encounter, like you're coming in to help out or do some voluntary work or something like that with the group. How do you convey to somebody that you do respect them, to a young person?
Um, well, I would say the first thing is clarifying what respect is, so they know that respect does not mean having someone obey them. Some people say that respect means to obey somebody else. If you're not respecting me, they're talking about they're not obeying them. That's not what respect is. It's to honor and hold in high esteem. So one of the ways to honor someone is to, first of all, be able to listen to what it is that they're saying,
Okay.
to try to create a non-judgmental environment, to at least hear where they're coming from, hear
Mm-hmm.
what their thoughts and ideas are, and acknowledge them. People, young or old, just want to be acknowledged. From a young child who's still in a crib to an older person in a senior home, and all in between, people just want to be acknowledged. So one of the greatest ways to show respect is to listen and hear what that person wants or desires or needs may be, and try to do it in a non-judgmental kind of way.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a very important thing. Just one of those factors. I know we're running out of time, but I just want to ask one thing. One of your 9 principles, or sorry, one of your principle or 10 principles was enlightenment.
Yes.
Just what is enlightenment?
Enlightenment has to do with increasing your understanding of who you are.
Okay.
Carlos Castaneda, in his book Wheel of Time, speaks about we should stalk ourselves.
Okay.
So usually stalking is not spoken of positively, but in this case, he speaks of stalking ourselves. So we examine ourselves with an eagle's eye to look at our own beliefs and why do we believe things a certain way, and where do our rules and restrictions come from, and why do we operate with things a certain way that they do. So enlightenment has to do with looking at yourself, looking at where your strengths are, looking at
Yes.
some areas where you possibly could stand some improvement,
Right.
and as well as being able to enrich the person that you are.
Okay, that is really really good and really really amazing to hear. Okay, I think we are coming to the end of our hour and the end of our session here. Marcus, I had a great time speaking to Oberon of the the King of the Elves. I know I was a little disappointed to hear you weren't wearing tights. I must admit, but never mind.
I was not.
All right. I'd like to thank you very much for being up at 2 a.m. in the morning to do this
Yes.
online interview with the strange Malaysian woman you've never met before.
Yes.
And to all those who'll be listening in now, who've listened in now, thank you very much for listening in. For those who'll be listening in the future, because this will be online and available for people to hear, thank you very much for listening to us. And I hope that you found this session to be helpful and in some way increase the mental health and happiness of your life. Thank you very much. Good
Thank you
night.
for the opportunity.
Okay, I'm going to stop the broadcast now.
All right.
Yes.